want to talk about what does it mean to do open source and how to grow your career with open source, right? So hopefully with a good amount of intro from Madhur and Tushar about why open source matters and how to contribute and how it can be beneficial to your career. I want to kind of expand on that point and talk further. So a bit about me, real quick. I am a founder at 1 to N, where we focus with respect to backend and site reliability engineering. We work with startups and scale up at consider like a Series A funded companies typically to grow their engineering team and scale their backend systems. That's been our primary forte as a company. I've been a backend developer for almost 1.5 decades now. Been into various roles. I also kind of write about the stories of pragmatic software engineering and how to be a good software engineer on Twitter and LinkedIn. So check me out over there if you're interested. Lastly, I love engineering in general. I like psychology, like to study human behavior and what motivates us, etc. I also like percussion. I play tabla. And there's one game that I love, which is probably like 25-year-old game now, which is called Age of Empires. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar, but it's a strategy game which requires you to zoom in to do something and zoom out to do something else, both at the same time. That's what it makes it very interesting from technology, business, and even kind of life perspective, because that's what we end up doing in life, in business, in technology. We have to kind of zoom in at some points to do something very specific, also at the same time sometimes zoom out and be able to have a bird's eye view. So that game is pretty interesting. Yeah, so that's a bit about me. Today's agenda, this is going to be a short kind of talk. I would not ask you to stop me in between for questions, because again, we have this Q&A. I'll try to go through them right after the talk. So because again, I'll just deliver this in 15-20 minutes. So today's agenda is mainly to cover really 2 points from my side, right? One is the whole open source, what it means, why it is useful, how should you go about it, why you should care about this. And secondly, mainly what you might be interested in is also growth, right? In terms of career, like how does this help me in growing my career? And how should I think about career growth in general with respect to software engineering field, right? So this is the main kind of agenda of this talk. I'm going to cover in open source, just going to cover a bit about awareness, what open source is, why it matters, etc. How you go about contributing to open source, right? Either as part of your daily job in future or as a side hustle. And right now, as you are studying as part of the FOSS initiative, right? And why this would kind of help your career. I'm going to also talk about finding the niche, why this is kind of important with respect to growing your career in certain direction. And in terms of then career growth, I'm going to talk about what it means to really grow in a career, right? And there's the soft part of software development. What does soft mean in software, right? I'm going to cover some of that. Cool. So let's get started. So let's talk first about the whole open source. I don't need to kind of convince you why open source matters. I believe like if you are using any technology, as of today, like take mobile phone, GPS, anything at all, you are using open source, right? And the world's most important software runs on open source. So open source is kind of super pervasive. It's almost invisible. It has become so good at and so reliable at a few things that it is almost invisible. We don't even think of that as a software, right? So it's pretty interesting to see how that has turned out over the last few decades. So that journey is super amazing to see. So I'll say like open source runs the world essentially, and we can do our part by contributing to some small initiatives, right? And in turn kind of benefit the whole community as well as each other. So I want to talk about how would you go about contributing to open source, right? One, obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is, yeah, you should code, right? You should write code that is in open, or you should review code that is in open, etc. What I want to kind of talk about is code is usually obviously one definite like most important way, but it's not the only way you can contribute as well. You can, for example, contribute to documentation, which is what a lot of like if you look at I think Madhur or Tushar mentioned about Kubernetes, Docker. So these are some tools who have one of the best documentation available out there, and a lot of adoption of these tools is driven by having good docs, right? So being if you're for example good at writing English, you're good at structuring your thoughts. Writing a good documentation is a really great way to contribute as well. And many small projects or tools that you might use, if you contribute as a documentation, the authors will like literally thank you, right? So that's something that's super useful to do. Obviously, other ways you can do is you can do a bug triage. Bug triage would mean try out that tool. If you file any issue, if you find any issues, like file that issue, write down the details, where it is breaking, why is it breaking. You can go next level where you can do a pull request, you can submit the pull request, you can review other pull requests for tools that you are interested in. You can even showcase your tools to other coworkers or students, or like if you really like a particular open source tool that has made life easy for you, please demo that to spread awareness, which is again sort of community kind of effort that you can do, right? You can do local meetups in areas to raise awareness about open source and tools that we use. Right? So there's kind of many more ways apart from just writing code that you can do to contribute to open source. And these are all kind of meaningful, impactful ways of helping the community out, right? So you might say, okay, this is all fine, but I want to really sort of actually contribute to the code part of it. How do I go about that? Or how do I find my first open source project? And what do I really do, right? So in my mind, it kind of boils down to picking or finding a niche. What I mean by that is a niche can be with respect to a language. Like you're studying say Python, JavaScript, Rust, or Java, pick any language essentially. Find out tools that are written in those languages, right? It could be by a technology. For example, if you're really fascinated by relational databases or graph databases, or how mobile apps are built, or how proxies, load balancers, and network related tools work, and how they actually make use of technology, right, under the hood. What protocols do they use? You can pick projects around that. You may be interested in a particular domain like AI, ML, cybersecurity, fintech, SaaS, any of these, right? Find out tools in that domain, find out open source projects in that domain, and see if that interests you. It could also be a particular tool, right? Could be Kubernetes or writing connectors for clouds. For example, you want to transfer data from one cloud to another. How would you do that? You want to write down some data pipeline transformations. You have a large data, you want to use Spark or use Kafka and write some transformations to convert that data from one format to another, right? All of these are kind of ideas of finding good use of open source in the sense that it's not kind of, you can also do by combining all of these together. So you can pick a language, choose a technology for a particular domain and use a tool, right? Combine all of them together and you have a very small subset of tools that that will that will be interesting to you, right? So this sort of picking a niche is still sort of an easy part. The next thing that I'll recommend is stick with it, right? Like don't waver, don't try out too many things. Like if you've made your mind with trying to contribute to a particular project, stick with it, right? Like try to go through the code, try to run this code too locally, go through it, interact with the community, be it Discord, Slack, etc. Talk to the authors, hang out in the forums, etc. Right? This is, I think, one of the hardest part that we generally try to switch our attention across multiple things, and we don't often stick with something, right? So this is where I want to say that one of the hardest thing that you have to do is you don't have to change your mind for the next, I'll say 6 months or so, right? So pick a particular niche and stick with it, right? Like actually use it day to day, talk to other team members and folks. This is one way where you will really develop the sense and the knowledge around that tool. and where it is being used, how it is useful, in what are the use cases where it may not be appropriate to use that tool, etc. Right? All of this will help you contribute to the tool in much more better way. Right? Lastly, I think this will force you to almost think about trade-off, right? Whether you should be a generalist versus a specialist. By generalist, I mean on the left, you see something like a Swiss Army knife, right? Which can do 100 things. But again, it's a tool that can be used generically. It may not be good at each of the things, but it can do a basically okay at job at everything. Whereas you have a specialized tool, it could be screwdriver, knife, scissors, take anything, right? Similarly, in terms of tech, think about it this way: that do you want to be a generalist where you are going to try out various things, right? From front end, back end, DevOps, security, AI, ML, all of it? Or you want to be specialized into a very particular thing because you are already clear that this is where your interests lie? I don't have a very strong answer here, and I would encourage you to still explore your curiosity, right? So don't get tied down to a path that, oh, generalization is bad or specialization is bad. I've had, and we've met, and I've known so many developers who tried out a bunch of things and kind of are good at multiple things, almost like a good generalist. Whereas I've also seen people who stuck with a particular thing they knew at the start of their career and went down that path and they become really good at it. Both have their pros and cons, and both will make you overall successful in software development, right? So you shouldn't be kind of tied down to a particular thing, but keep your mind open, try out different things, and find out what you really like, right? And then go double down on that. I think so. We've talked about open source very high level and kind of trying to contribute to it. I'm not like there's a bunch of other talks about how to sort of contribute to open source, what tools, like specific techniques, etc. But I wanted to give a very meta kind of perspective to you as you're going through this journey. Next, again, similarly, I want to talk about growth in your career, how you should think about your career growth, whether you are growing, what you should do differently, and how should you tackle software development career overall, right? Again, this is more meta. This is not sort of recipe that I can share with you, but it's something for you to think about as you approach the software engineering career. So there's something that I tweeted a while ago on learning, where I've certainly sort of I've certainly had this kind of thought early in my life where I would assume learning is like very sequential, boot camp oriented, where I just do these 3 LeetCode problems and then I'll be good, or I just do this one course and I'll know everything and anything about that particular technology. It is usually not like that. It is very much like going around it in circles, where you take a look at something, you take a look at it another time, it teaches you something differently, right? It is just with respect to like Linux, SQL, almost like all fundamental technology skills. As you kind of spend more time with them, the better you become at it, right? So this is kind of something about learning, which which is sort of, I just want to put it out there, and hopefully this is useful to you in case you're feeling stuck. In terms of growth, here is how I think about growth in your career. A lot of people say that I have n number of years of experience, right? Or 10 years of experience or 5 years of experience. I would suggest to sort of optimize for or think about experiences per year. How many experiences per year do you have than just the number of years of experience, right? Because if you have varied kind of experiences, you've tried out various things, then that is going to be massively beneficial for you to learn and grow as an individual than just carrying the number of years of experience. Right. So think about this point. A corollary or the sort of thing that follows after that is you could kind of loosely define career growth as almost like a frequency of new things you are trying for the first time. Right. So if you're trying public speaking, if you're trying how to write a good blog post, if you're trying how to contribute to a tool's documentation. Trying all of this for the first time is going to feel painful. It's going to feel that you're so bad at these things that it's going to the imposter syndrome is going to kick in, and you're going to feel sort of frustrated at some points. I would suggest that, yeah, if you're trying new things in your career and the number of new things you're trying, that means you are essentially growing, right? Think about it that way, that if we try out a different thing that we have never tried before, that means we can get better at it, right? And if you keep doing a particular thing for a couple of times, you usually get better at these things, right? Same as programming, same as learning an instrument, for example, stuff like that. So this is how I would like, this is something that I would have, uh, it would have been great if somebody in my early career had told me about to think about these things. So this is where sort of how I want to pass it on and say that think about things in this perspective. This doesn't mean that you try out every shiny new thing, right? This doesn't mean you jump on any new technology sort of bandwagon and marketing gimmick and try out everything and always have to try out this new JavaScript framework that's out there, for example, right? So often as you spend some time in your career on software development, you will realize that there are waves and there is a sort of gimmick in terms of marketing for some tools, right? So every shiny new thing may not always be better, right? So you kind of have to evaluate whether this new hype train is something that I want to get down to uh, and jump on, or is this something that I should just watch from the sidelines and just kind of learn enough about it to not be missing out, right? So think about it from that angle as well. For example, like one of the reasons why I say this is that if you don't have fundamental knowledge about things, right? For example, the stuff that we study in colleges, right? Operating systems, databases, networking, compilers, programming languages, etc. We may have this thinking that is this really useful in programming on day-to-day job, right? Or is it just too much theory that I'm learning without much practice, right? So one thing that I want to talk about is these matter. Like if you know really good, if you're really good at understanding how operating system works and how networking works, picking up a new cloud like AWS, even for example Kubernetes, right? How it works internally, it will be much more easier for you to pick that up. But if you have no interest in how things work internally, then any new tool or any new abstraction is going to be like a black box, and you're going to have to learn it from scratch again and again, right? And you're going to be lagging behind. Anytime there is a new tool out there, you're going to be scrambling to figure out how it works and what it does and where it fits in the whole mental model, right? So in that way, focus on fundamentals, operating systems, compilers, programming languages in general, and kind of try to understand and build knowledge on top of that, almost like by deriving things instead of just rote memorization. Right? Otherwise, you're going to feel like you hit a wall and you can't do much about it. So, lastly, I want to quickly talk about a few soft parts about software. What I mean by soft parts is that these are some things that trip us, and as you grow through your career, you will realize these become very important than just the hard programming skills, for example. So one is software development at a commercial level in multiple in kind of organizations or even as an open source contributor, right? It's a team sport. It's not a solo journey. Like you cannot be uh, a single person who's just doing things in isolation without communicating with anyone else. It won't usually work at some scale, right? So you need to kind of understand and play it as a team sport than a solo journey. What that also means is that ask for help if needed, right? Like if you don't know how something works, being able to explain the issue, for example, being able to ask questions on GitHub PR comments, right? These are again some small, simple skills that become very valuable when you're communicating as part of a team. Like I consider hard skills like programming, designing as hard skills. So any hard skills without these soft skills of being able to collaborate well with each other, being able to communicate your ideas, that matters. Like without these skills, hard skills won't get you much far, right? So think about and continue to improve on your collaboration and team effort. Lastly, I would say take responsibility and ownership. This is one quality if you take in terms of, for example, contributing to any project. If there's an issue created, then do you feel it's your project and somebody has raised the issue? So would you be willing to talk about what the issue is, help the user out, figure out why the issue happened, etc. Like just showing that care goes a long way in your career, right? And it gets noticed. So taking responsibility for your actions and showing ownership really helps in that way. There is a sort of couple of books that I would recommend, which are some of them are recently written. So, like this, for example, if you're interested in the whole engineering of software and open source applications, I would really recommend the first book, which is The Architecture of Open Source Applications. If you just search for open source application architectures on Google, you will find there's a website which has got multiple books and they talk about architecture of open source applications like Nginx, for example, how it works. Right? For example, Redis is a key value database. Uh, how does that work? How is it designed? What would it go about in designing a compiler, for example? So this is very much focused on the engineering part of and software programming part of open source. The second book is, I would say, is more meta book. It's more about how to be a good programmer and a responsible software developer. So it talks about some habits that you should learn about source code control and taking ownership and stuff like that. So it's a again 20-year-old book, but super relevant even today. Uh, Personally, I've reread this book like at least 4 or 5 times in my career, and every time I read it, it was that there was some mistake or some things that I've learned from it uh, that have been super valuable to me. Lastly, this is the software engineering, the soft parts. Again, this is a book which especially talks about, again, all this should be again available openly on web. So this talks about what are the soft parts, why they matter, and how do you go about building and developing the soft skills as a software developer. All right, yeah, that's it from me. I would say keep learning, keep growing, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, GitHub, anywhere. This is my handle, Chinmay 5. It's all same everywhere. Uh, Check out our one-to-one website where we work on interesting, challenging scalability and reliability problem statements. There's a playbook that we have written, which is how we run the company. So it's out in the open. So check that out. And lastly, there is one open source project that we built recently. It's been almost over a year now, close to a year. It's called Cloud Lens. Here is the GitHub URL. You can try that out as a first open source project, right? Like just explore. It's small enough. It's written in Go, and it's related to viewing AWS and GCP cloud resources as part of your terminal. Right? So something, if you're interested in, try this out, check this out. This is born out of our internal discussions, and we built it as open source. So yeah, check this out and see if this interests you. Reach out to me. Happy to help you out in contributing to this or any other project as well. All right.